If you're 45, 50, maybe even 55, and you've just looked at your retirement savings and felt that knot in your stomach, don't click away just yet. Give me the next 4 minutes before you decide it's too late, because the math you just did in your head is probably wrong. Not because you're bad at math, because you've been using the same assumptions everyone else uses, and once you get past your mid-40s, the rules actually change. There are opportunities built into the tax code that most people never hear about, even though they're designed specifically for people your age. Meet Gary. Gary is 48. He has about $31,000 sitting in an old 401k from a job he left 6 years ago. He still has a car payment, and every now and then he tells himself, I really need to get serious about retirement. So he does what most people do. He opens Google. He types in something like, how much do I need to retire? The first headline says he needs around $2 million. He stares at it for a second, closes the tab, and decides he'll deal with it another day. It feels harmless, maybe even reasonable, but that decision, to avoid looking any deeper, could easily become the most expensive financial mistake he makes this decade. Now meet Curtis. Curtis is 47. His income is about the same as Gary's. He also got a late start. He has around $34,000 saved, and to make matters worse, he's carrying even more credit card debt than Gary. At first glance, his situation doesn't look any better. But 6 months ago, Curtis stumbled across something called the catch-up contribution rules. Special IRS provisions created for people approaching retirement. Instead of closing the tab, he kept reading. Then he sat down and ran the numbers. Today, if he stays on course, Curtis is projected to have roughly $490,000 in retirement savings by age 65. Gary? He's on track for around $110,000. Same age, similar income, very similar starting point. Yet there's almost a $380,000 difference between them. Not because Curtis got lucky, not because he picked better investments, simply because he understood 5 rules that Gary never knew existed. And that's exactly what we're covering in this video. Here's what you'll learn. First, we'll tackle the one issue most finance channels gloss over, the debt that can quietly destroy your investing progress before it even starts. Then we'll walk through the IRS catch-up contribution rules built specifically for people in their 50s, including one brand new rule for 2026 and another opportunity that's about to disappear. Finally, I'll show you the exact formula Curtis used, so before this video ends, you'll be able to calculate your own retirement projection using your own numbers. Not someday, but today. So let's answer the question you're probably here for. Suppose you're 47 years old. You've saved almost nothing for retirement, but starting today you maximize every catch-up contribution available to you, putting away about $32,500 a year between your 401k and your IRA. Assume those investments earn a long-term average return of 7% per year. That's actually a conservative assumption compared with the historical average for a broadly diversified stock portfolio. Under those assumptions, you'd be on pace to build roughly $650,000 by age 65. Is that guaranteed? Of course not. Is it investment advice? No. It's simply math. And throughout this video, I'll show you exactly how those numbers work so you can check every assumption yourself. Because if you're watching this channel, I know one thing about you. You don't just accept the numbers, you verify them. Here's what really changes once you get into your 40s, and it's not your motivation, it's the rules. The tax code starts treating you differently as you get older, first at 50, and then again at 60. Most people know about the first change. Almost nobody knows about the second. But before any of those rules matter, we need to talk about something the finance world loves to skip over because it's not nearly as exciting as talking about stocks. Debt. According to Experian's latest consumer debt research, Generation X, roughly people between 45 and 60, carries the highest average credit card balance of any generation alive today. On average, it's around $9,600, higher than millennials, higher than baby boomers. And if that sounds familiar, here's why it matters. If you're paying 18%, 20%, even 24% interest on a credit card balance, there isn't a dividend portfolio in the world that's going to outperform that. Think about it this way. Paying off a credit card charging 22% interest is like earning a guaranteed, tax-free 22% return on your money. No stock market investment can promise that combination of return, certainty, and zero risk. That's why the first rule is simple. I call it the debt-first decision. If you're carrying high-interest revolving debt, that should be your first priority, or at least something you tackle alongside a small retirement contribution that's large enough to capture your employer's matching contribution, because that match is still free money. Walking away from it is like turning down part of your paycheck. And just to be clear, this isn't about guilt. It's not about saying you made bad decisions. Life happens, medical bills happen, job losses happen, divorce happens, unexpected expenses happen. The goal isn't to judge where you are. It's to make the next decision the smartest one possible. That's exactly what Curtis did. Remember, he actually had more debt than Gary, but instead of pretending it didn't exist, he dealt with it in the right order. He kept paying it down while continuing to build retirement savings wherever it made sense. He didn't wait until everything was perfect before getting started. He kept moving. Now, as important as that is, paying off debt alone doesn't explain why Curtis ends up almost $380,000 ahead. The biggest difference happens after the money starts flowing into retirement accounts. And this is where people in their 40s and 50s unknowingly leave thousands of dollars on the table every single year. Let's fix that. Here's where the math really starts changing. Once you turn 50, the IRS allows you to contribute more than younger workers to the exact same retirement accounts. For 2026, the standard 401k contribution limit is $24,500. That's the limit for everyone. But once you're 50 or older, you're allowed to make an additional $8,000 catch-up contribution. That brings your total annual contribution to $32,500 in the very same account where someone in their 30s is capped at $24,500. The same idea applies to IRAs. The standard contribution limit for 2026 is $7,500. If you're 50 or older, you can contribute an extra $1,100. That number is actually new. For nearly 2 decades, the IRA catch-up contribution stayed fixed at exactly $1,000. Only recently did it begin adjusting for inflation. So if the last time you checked these limits was several years ago, you're probably working with outdated numbers. But here's the part that almost nobody explains correctly. And if you're approaching 60, pay close attention. Between the ages of 60 and 63, there's another opportunity called the super catch-up. For 2026, that amount is $11,250. Now here's where people get confused. A lot of investors assume they can stack that on top of the regular $8,000 catch-up. They can't. The super catch-up replaces the regular catch-up during those 4 years. It doesn't add to it. So if you're 61 years old, your contribution limit isn't $24,500 plus $8,000 plus $11,250. It's simply $24,500 plus $11,250 for a total of $35,750 in a single year. That's the largest 4-year contribution window the tax code gives anyone. If you're getting close to 60, it's one of the biggest opportunities you'll ever have to accelerate your retirement savings. And there's another catch-up provision that doesn't get nearly enough attention. Your health savings account, or HSA. If you're 55 or older, you can contribute an additional $1,000 each year. Unlike the IRA catch-up, that amount hasn't changed since HSAs were first introduced more than 20 years ago. The dollar amount isn't huge, but the tax benefits are. HSAs are one of the few accounts that offer what's often called a triple tax advantage. Your contributions are tax deductible, your investments grow tax-free, and withdrawals for qualified medical expenses are also tax-free. Most people use an HSA like a checking account for doctor's visits and prescriptions. As you get closer to retirement, it often makes much more sense to think of it as another long-term investment account, because that's exactly what it can become. Now, there's another change taking effect in 2026 that could completely change how your catch-up contributions are taxed, and depending on your income, it may apply directly to you. Starting in 2026, if you earned more than $150,000 in wages from your employer last year, the IRS now requires any catch-up contributions you make to go into a Roth account instead of a traditional pre-tax account. This isn't something lawmakers are still debating. It's already in effect. So what does that actually mean? Before, those catch-up contributions reduced your taxable income today. Now, if you're above that income threshold, you'll pay taxes on that money up front. In return, the money grows tax-free, and qualified withdrawals in retirement are tax-free as well. You lose the deduction today, but you gain tax-free income later. Neither approach is automatically better. They're simply different tax strategies. The important part is knowing which rules apply to you. I call this the Roth catch-up cliff because many people planned their retirement around a tax deduction that quietly disappeared. And here's why so many investors were caught off guard. This rule was originally supposed to begin back in 2024. Then it was delayed. Then it was delayed again. Payroll systems and retirement plan providers simply weren't ready. So for a lot of higher income workers, this change arrived much later than expected. If you're one of them, there's one thing you should verify as soon as possible. Check with your employer's plan administrator. Why? Because not every workplace retirement plan offers a Roth option. If your plan doesn't, that could affect how your catch-up contributions are handled. Depending on your situation, and assuming you meet the income requirements, it may make sense to contribute through a Roth IRA instead. The key point isn't to panic, it's simply to make sure your retirement plan still works the way you think it does. There's one more tax break worth mentioning. It's smaller, but for many households, it's essentially free money. It's called the saver's credit. Unlike a tax deduction, which reduces the amount of income that's taxed, this is a direct reduction of your tax bill. Depending on your income, it can be worth up to $1,000 for single filers, $2,000 for married couples filing jointly, all for doing something you were already planning to do, contributing to a retirement account. For 2026, married couples can still qualify with household income up to $80,500. But here's the catch. This credit is disappearing. The 2025 and 2026 tax years are the final 2 years it's available in its current form before it's replaced by a completely different system. So if your income falls anywhere near the eligibility range, don't overlook it. It's one of those opportunities that simply won't be around forever. So let's pause for a second and look at where we are. We've covered the right way to deal with debt. We've looked at the catch-up contribution rules. We've talked about the Roth changes. Now it's time for the question that really matters. What does all of this actually mean for your retirement balance? Because knowing the rules is useful. But seeing what those rules can do to your money, that's what changes the way people think about retirement. Let's run the numbers. Here's the part most videos don't tell you. The truth is, you don't have the same advantage a 25-year-old does. And that's okay. Time is the biggest driver of compound growth, and if you're in your late 40s or 50s, you simply have fewer years for your investments to compound. That's reality. But it doesn't mean you're out of options. It just means you have to play a different game. I call it the compressed compounding problem. When you can't add more years, you compensate by investing more during the years you still have. That's exactly why the IRS created the catch-up contribution rules in the first place. They're designed to help people make up for lost time, so instead of talking in theory, let's look at 3 realistic scenarios. Scenario 1. Let's say you're 47 years old, just like Curtis. You've saved almost nothing for retirement. Starting today, you max out your eligible 401k and IRA contributions, about $32,500 per year. Assuming an average annual return of 7%, you'd end up with roughly $650,000 by age 65. Not because of some magical investment, just because you consistently invested as much as the rules allowed. Scenario 2. Now imagine you're 50 years old and you've already managed to save $100,000. You continue contributing the same $32,500 every year. Now your existing savings are compounding while you're adding new money at the same time. Under those assumptions, you'd be looking at around $900,000 by age 65. That's the power of starting with an existing balance. Every dollar you've already saved keeps working while every new contribution joins it. Scenario 3. Now let's move to someone who's 53 years old with $300,000 already invested. They continue contributing every year, and once they reach age 60, they take advantage of the super catch-up, increasing their annual contribution limit to $35,750 for those 4 years. With those assumptions, they're on pace for roughly $1.4 million by age 65. Notice something all 3 examples have in common. None of them require you to have started investing at 25. None of them depend on finding the next Nvidia or timing the market perfectly. The biggest difference is simply understanding the rules and actually using them. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. That's great, but how do I figure out my own number? Good question. Here's a simple way to think about it. Take your current retirement balance. Add the amount you expect to contribute every year. Multiply that across the number of years until you want to retire. Then let compound growth do the rest. The actual calculation is more complex because every contribution compounds for a different length of time, but that's the basic framework. When you run it, use a return assumption you can comfortably defend. I like using 7% because it's conservative enough to avoid unrealistic expectations while still being consistent with the long-term history of a broadly diversified stock portfolio. That said, don't stop at one number. Run the calculation at 6%, then try 8%. See how much your outcome changes. Stress testing your assumptions gives you a much better understanding of what your future could realistically look like. And if you'd rather not build the spreadsheet yourself, there's a free Dividend snowball calculator linked in the description. Just enter your age, your current balance, and your yearly contribution. It runs the math automatically and lets you test different scenarios in just a few seconds. Now that you know what's possible, let's talk about the mistakes that keep people from ever reaching those numbers in the first place. Before we wrap up, I want to leave you with 3 mistakes I see over and over again from people in exactly your position. Avoiding these can be just as important as everything we've covered so far. Mistake number 1, rolling over your 401k too quickly. A lot of people leave a job and immediately move their 401k into an IRA without giving it a second thought. Sometimes that's the right move. Sometimes it isn't. Here's why. There's a little-known provision called the Rule of 55. If you leave your employer in or after the year you turn 55, you may be able to withdraw money from that employer's 401k without paying the usual 10% early withdrawal penalty. But there's a catch. That rule only applies to the employer's retirement plan. The moment you roll that money into an IRA, that special access disappears permanently. So if there's any chance you'll need those funds between ages 55 and 59 and a half, slow down before initiating that rollover. Make sure you understand what you're giving up. Mistake number 2. Investing in taxable accounts before maximizing your tax advantages. This happens more often than you'd think. Someone opens a brokerage account, starts buying ETFs, and feels like they're making progress, while leaving free tax benefits on the table. If you're not taking full advantage of Aurora Malkians, your employer's matching contribution, your catch-up contribution limits, and your other tax advantage retirement accounts before investing heavily in a taxable brokerage account, you're likely paying more in taxes than necessary. Taxes may not feel exciting, but keeping more of your money working for you is one of the easiest ways to improve long-term results. Mistake number 3, letting fear interrupt the plan. This is the biggest one. Markets fall. That's what they do. Every investor knows that intellectually. The problem is that when your account suddenly drops 20% or 30%, it stops feeling like a chart and starts feeling personal. That's when people panic. They stop contributing. They move everything to cash, or they sell after the market has already fallen. Ironically, that's often the exact moment when continuing to invest matters the most. The people who eventually reach the kinds of retirement balances we talked about today aren't usually the ones who found the perfect fund. They're the ones who kept investing through the uncomfortable years, through recessions, through bear markets, through headlines that made it feel like the financial world was ending. Consistency beats perfection almost every time. And here's something worth remembering. Discipline isn't something you magically wake up with one day. It's usually the result of making one decision early and sticking with it. Set your contributions to happen automatically. Remove emotion from the process. That way, when the next market downturn inevitably arrives, you won't have to make the same decision all over again. Your plan will already be doing exactly what it's supposed to do. Now let's put everything together. The debt-first decision reminds us that paying off high-interest debt comes first, because very few investments can compete with a guaranteed return equal to the interest you're no longer paying. The catch-up window gives investors over 50 the opportunity to contribute significantly more to retirement accounts, with an even larger contribution limit available between ages 60 and 63 through the super catch-up. The Roth catch-up rule changes when higher income earners pay taxes on those extra contributions, not whether they pay taxes. And finally, your catch-up number gives you a practical way to estimate where your retirement savings could be by combining your current balance, future contributions, and the power of compound growth. Those 4 ideas work together, and once you understand them, retirement planning starts looking a lot less intimidating. Let's go back to where we started. Remember Gary? And remember Curtis? They were almost the same age. They earned roughly the same income. And if anything, Curtis started in a slightly tougher position because he had more debt. Yet by retirement, there's almost $380,000 separating them. What made the difference? It wasn't luck. It wasn't finding the perfect stock. It wasn't some secret investment strategy. It was something much simpler. Curtis took the time to learn 5 rules that had been sitting in the tax code all along. Rules created specifically for people in his stage of life. Gary never did. That's it. That's the gap. And if you've watched this far, you're no longer Gary. Today you've seen the same rules Curtis found. Now you know they exist. The only question left is whether you'll put them to work. Because the people telling you it's too late are usually doing the math with only half the equation. They ignore the catch-up rules. They ignore the tax advantages. They ignore the opportunities that become available later in life. Once you include those, the picture can look very different. Will everyone retire with millions of dollars? No. That's not what this video is promising. What it is showing you is that your future is probably far more flexible than you think, especially if you're willing to act instead of assuming the opportunity has already passed. If you want to see what happens after you've built that retirement portfolio, how those investments can actually produce a monthly income through dividends, watch my video, How to Live Off Dividends, starting at your 40s or 50s. You're not late. In that video, we take the retirement balance we've been talking about today and turn it into a realistic dividend income plan you can actually picture living on. And before you go, I'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment with your age and how much you've saved for retirement so far, not so you can compare yourself with anyone else. Do it because you'll probably discover something surprising. There are thousands of people in exactly the same position, asking the same questions and trying to figure out the same math. You're a lot less alone than you think. And remember, the best time to understand these rules may have been years ago. The second best time is today.